Let's sit in a comfortable meditation posture and close the eyes. We'll put our attention on the silence that is always there deep in the mind. Become that silence. You are the silent witness. Now please listen to the Yoga Vasishta. We're continuing with book 4, chapter 50, verse 10. The seas with their shining waters were her mirrors that reflected the rays from the jewels on her starry frame. The season's fruits and flowers were like the embroidery on her bodice, and the rays of the sun and moon were like powders or sandalwood paste over her body. Clouds covering the landscape were her garment, and trees and plants on the forest edges, whereas the fringes or the skirts of her dress. In this manner we saw all 10 sides of heaven, full with the form of a fairy queen. Chapter 51. Dasura begets a son. Vasishta continued. Dasura remained as an ascetic in his hermitage in that forest. He was known as Kandama Dasura, and he was a giant of austere penance. Sitting on the leaves of the vine, growing on the branch of that tree, he looked up to heaven. Then, setting himself in the lotus posture, he called his mind back to himself. Unacquainted with spiritual adoration and unpracticed as to the ceremonial ritual, he started to perform his mental sacrifice with the desire of gaining its reward. Sitting on the leaves of the vines in his aerial seat, he employed his inner spirit and mind to discharge his sacrificial rites of the sacred fire and horse sacrifice. For the space of the full 10 years, he continued there in his acts of satisfying the gods with his mental sacrifices of the bull, horse, and human immolations, their rewards in his mind. In process of time, his mind was purified and expanded, and he gained the knowledge of the beautification of his soul. His ignorance being dispelled, his heart became purified of the dirt of worldly desire. He came to behold a woodland goddess, standing beside his leafy and mossy seat. She was a body of light and dressed in a robe of flowers. Her form and face were beautiful to behold, and her large bright eyes turned wistfully toward him. Her body breathed the fragrance of the blue lotus, and her figure charmed his innermost soul. Then he spoke to the goddess, standing before him, her eyes demurely looking down. Who are you, O tender lady, and who looks like a vine covered with flowers? You defy Kama, the god of love, with your beautiful form and eyes resembling lotus petals. Why do you stand like a forest nymph, a goddess, defending flowering vines? Thus approached, the dame with tear-like eyes and protruding bosom replied to him. She said to the hermit with a sweet and charming voice, "May you prosper in attaining the objects of your wishes. Anything which is desirable and difficult to attain in this world is surely attainable when sought after with proper effort by the great. I am, O Brahman, a woodland goddess of this forest, which is so full of creeping plants and decorated by beautiful kadamba trees. I strayed here to see the festive joy of the woodland goddesses, which always takes place in this forest on this 13th day of the lunar month of Chaitra. Here I saw my companions enjoying their festival of love and felt myself sorry among them to think of my childlessness. Finding you accomplished in all qualifications, I have come here with my intent of begetting a son by you. Please, sage, do procreate a son in me, or else I will have to burn my body to get rid of my sorrow of childlessness." Hearing the woodland lady speaking in this manner, the hermit smiled at her, gave her a flower with his own hand, and spoke kindly to her. "Leave, O lady, commit yourself to the worship of Shiva for a whole month. And then, like a tender vine, you shall give birth to a boy as beautiful as a bud by the time of the year. But that son, who you desired of me at the sacrifice of your life, will give himself over to austerities like mine and will become a seer like myself." So the sage dismissed the suppliant lady, now gladdened in her face, and she promised to perform the necessary for her blessing's sake. Then the lotus-eyed lady left and went to her home. The hermit passed his months, seasons, and years in his holy meditation. After a long time, the lotus-eyed lady returned to the sage with her boy, now grown up to the 12th year of his age. She made her obeisance and said before him with her boy of the moonlight bright face. She uttered her words as sweet as the murmur of a humble bee to a steady amara tree. This sage is the would-be son, Bhavya, of both of us, whom I have trained in all the branches of learning. He is only untaught in the best knowledge, that which releases the soul from its return to this world of troubles. My Lord, please instruct him in that knowledge. For who is there that should like to keep his own son in ignorance? Being so asked by her, Asura spoke to the tender mother and asked her to leave the child and leave. She being gone, the boy remained submissive to his father and dwelt by his side as his student, like Aruna waiting upon the sun. Accustomed in austerity, the boy continued to receive the best knowledge from his father's various lectures. He passed a long time with his father in that place as the sage's son. The boy was taught with various narratives and tales with many examples and visible illustrations, and also with historical accounts and the evidence of the Vedas and the Vedanta. The boy remained attendant on his father's lessons without feeling any anxiety. He formed his right notions of things by means of their instruction. Thus, the magnanimous father instilled true knowledge into the mind of his son through the fourfold process of right reasoning and correct diction, rather than the elegance of expression, as the cloud, by its hoarse sounds, indicates approaching rain to the peacock. Chapter 52. The allegory of the airborne king, Kota, mind, and his grand city. Vasishta continued. Once I passed by that way in my invisible body to bathe in the heavenly stream of Mandakini in the ethereal region. After my departure from that region, by the way of the 7 rishis, I arrived at the place where Dasura lived on his high Kadamba tree. I heard a voice from the hollow of the tree in the forest, which was as charming as the buzzing of a bee fluttering about the bud of a lotus. Attend, my intelligent son, said Dasura, to a story that I will tell you by way of a simile of worldly things. It is pleasant to hear. Dasura speaking. There is a very powerful king, renowned in all the 3 worlds for his great prosperity. His name is Kota, or air produced, and he is able to grasp the whole world. All the lords of the earth bend their heads lowly under his rule and bear the badge of their submission to him as a great honor. As poor men are proud to carry a bright gem on the head. He exulted in his valor and possession of all kinds of rarities. There was no one in the 3 worlds able to compare to him or conquer him. His unnumbered acts and exploits are filled with successive pairs and pleasures. They are as interminable as the continuous waves of the sea. No one has been able to check the prowess of that mighty brave king by force of fire or sword, as none has ever been able to press the wind in his hand. Even the gods, Vishnu and Shiva, have fallen short of following his steps in his ambitious pursuits and in the splendid inventions of his imagination. With his triple form of Sattvika, Rajasika, and Tamasika quality, pure, active, and passive, he encompasses the world and is able to accomplish all sorts of actions. He is born in the extensive emptiness of the Brahman, with his triple body, like that of a bird, flesh, bones, and feathers, and he resumes in vacuum, like air and sound. He built a city in that unlimited space of the universe, having 14 provinces in its triple divisions of the earth, regions above and below it. It is beautiful, with forests and groves and pleasure lawns and hills, and bound by 7 lakes of pearly waters on all sides. It is lit by 2 lamps of hot and cooling light, which revolve above and below the city in their daily and nightly courses, as those of righteous and nefarious people. The king peopled his great city of his with many self-moving bodies that move in their spheres, quite ignorant of themselves. Some of these are appointed in higher and some in lower spheres, and others move in their middle course. Some are destined to live a longer time, and others doomed to die in a day. The bodies are covered with black skins and hairs and furnished with 9 holes, which are continually receiving air and carrying out all to keep them alive. They are supplied with 5 lights of sensation and perception. They are supported by 3 poles, 2 legs and a backbone, and a framework of white bones for the beams and bamboo rafters. It is plastered over with flesh, like moistened clay, and defended by 2 arms like latches on a doorway. The great king placed the yaksha of egoism as sentinel to guard this house. The guard is as ferocious as a fierce Bhairava manifestation of Shiva in the dark, and as timid as a Bhairava by day. The masters of these moving bodies play many pranks in them, like a bird played and frolics in its own nest. The triple-formed king is always fickle and never steady. He resides in many bodies and plays his games there, guarded by his egoism sentinel. He leaves one body for another at will, like a bird alights from one branch to another. This fickle-minded prince is ever changeful in his will. He lives in one city and builds another for his future home. Like one under the influence of a ghost, he stirs up from one place and runs to another. Like a man builds, breaks, and rebuilds his aerial castle as a hobby. The mind sometimes wishes to destroy its former frame and move to another, and it effects its purpose at will. After it had subdued and subsided to rest, the mind is produced again as the waves of the sea. Slowly and gradually, it pursues a different course in its renewed course of life. In this new life, the king sometimes represents repents of his own conduct and acts, and then laments for his ignorance and miseries, and knows not what to do. Sometimes the king is dejected by sorrow, and at other times elated by success, like the current of a river, now going down in the hot season, then overflowing the banks in the rains. The king is led by his hobbies like the waters of the sea by the winds, pulls and swells, falls and rises, runs fast and ceases to flow at once, as in a calm sea. Chapter 53. Explanation of the city. Vishnu continued. Then the boy asked his holy father, who was sitting reclined on his sacred Kadamba tree in the midst of the forest of great Asia in the gloom of night, the son said, "Tell me, sage, who is this airborne king of supernatural form, who you described just now? I do not fully comprehend its meaning, and I want it to be explained to me clearly." Sage, you said that this king constructs a new home for himself while residing in his present body, and leaves for it after he leaves the old frame. This seems impossible to me, as the journey of one tense with another, the present with the future. Dasura replied, "My son, hear me tell you the meaning of the parable, which will explain to you the nature of this revolving world in its true life. First, I told you that in the beginning, a non-entity sprang from the entity of God. And this non-entity, being stretched out afterwards, gave rise to this illusory world called the cosmos. The empty spirit of the supreme deity gives rise to this formless will, and therefore is called the airborne or mind-born. It is born of itself in its formless state from the formless spirit, and dissolves itself into the same, just like a wave rising from and falling in the bosom of the sea. Will produces everything, and there is nothing produced except by the will. The will is the same as its object, which constitutes and exists in it, and lives and dies along with its object. Know the gods Brahma, Vishnu, Indra, Shiva, and the Rudras are offsprings of the willful mind. Just like branches are the offshoots of the main tree, and summits are projections of the principal mountain. The mind, in its form of Virinchi, the first manifestation of Brahma, builds the city of the three worlds in the vacuum of Brahman by reason of it being endowed with intelligence from omniscience. Now let us continue established as the silent witness. And employ the Trimana Sanyama technique on the esoteric Mahamantra to balance all karmic traces that have been enlivened by today's reading. Jai Gurudev.